Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this exploration of inner child healing through the Gene Keys. I have prepared some slides, so I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm hoping you can. There we go. Should be able to see that now. Amazing. Let's get that full screen. Here we go. So thank you everyone that is here live. Thank you if you're watching the replay. I'm so excited for this. I think that this is such an amazing and in-depth part of the Gene Keys and of the golden path of the Gene Keys, and looking into like inner child healing and entering into the heart of our emotional wounds is such like beautiful deep inner work, but it can also be done with such lightness and grace as well. And there is so much within this, within all of the Gene Keys. We're going to focus really specifically in on some elements within the Venus sequence, which I'll explain what that is if that is a new phrase that you haven't heard of the Venus sequence before. And I we'll go into just a little bit of an introduction to who I am, what the Gene Keys are, and what we will cover here. So my name is Rachel White. I'm guessing if you're here, you know that already. I'm a coach, author, speaker, Gene Keys guide, and I work with women to facilitate them exploring more of their own depth, more of their own creativity, more of their own pleasure, and really activating their own inner wisdom to live the life that they fully want to live and that are designed to live, and that feels like a masterpiece of art that they're creating every day. And I do that in a lot of different ways, through a lot of programs, through Gene Keys guidance, through the books I write, and all of that. What are the Gene Keys? So the Gene Keys, when we look at the Gene Keys, there's kind of like three different elements. So there's the Gene Keys organization, the Gene Keys framework, and then there's your personal Gene Keys profile. Your personal Gene Keys profile shows you the Gene Keys that you have active within your cosmic and genetic imprint. And with the profile that you have, there's 11 spheres on the profile. So you have up to 11 different Gene Keys that have different story codes that play out in different areas of your life. And for each of your Gene Keys, you have a shadow, a gift, and a city. The city is the divine gift. The gift is the divine in action in the world. And the shadow is the distortion of that divine energy, and can be manifested and expressed when we are operating at a shadow frequency within our life. And all three make up the same storyline of each particular Gene Key. There's also lines and pathways and all of those things, but your entire profile gives you a map for your cosmic imprint and for your storyline here on Earth. And then within what sits as like the cosmic backdrop to your personal profile is the entire Gene Keys transmission of all 64 Gene Keys. And the 64 Gene Keys are the 64 story code archetypes of humanity. And all story codes are running like as the cosmic backdrop, and all have an influence over us, whether they are active in our profile or not. And then there's the Gene Keys, the organization. Richard Rudd is the founder. He developed, he was the first student and the founder of the Gene Keys. He wrote all the books, all the material, and it was birthed from systems like human design, the I Ching, and all of that. So I really do want to acknowledge the source of this material. What I'm covering here is from what Richard Rudd and within the Gene Keys organization has developed in his work with the Gene Key. So I really want to acknowledge him and pay reference to him and all others that are involved in the process as well. So what we're going to cover today is exploring elements of inner child healing and how that is done through the framework and the system of the Gene Keys, and through looking at and exploring your profile. Okay, so who is your inner child? And I'm guessing if you're here, like you've at least heard the term of your inner child. And essentially, like there are so many definitions, but I see your inner child as the innocent, playful part of you who loves unconditionally and accepts all at face value. When you think about yourself as an inner child, like children, especially children between 0 and 7 years old, their mental body and their emotional body, which we'll explore that a little in a moment as well, hasn't like fully incarnated yet. So it means that they don't have the capacity to think in a logical way or to apply logic. And that means that everything is accepted like at face value. If you tell a child something, even though they may ask why and may have curiosity, especially as they get older, most of the time, like it's just accepted, like that, like what you're showing me is truth. And it's not necessarily what you tell them, but what they are shown. And what they are shown to be the truth is what they accept at face value without the capacity to critically think through what is happening or to think about variables beyond what they are aware of or beyond what they can see. So our inner child, born like innocent and playful and loving unconditionally, has these like all this conditioning and programming placed upon her or him or them. And your inner child is the version of you who only knew love and who was subsequently conditioned to make up the fundamental pieces of who you are today. And what I mean by that is like your inner child is a past consciousness of you. We have so many past versions of us, like past consciousness of us that is still living like within our astral body, within our energetic bodies. And those previous consciousness versions of us still have an influence over like things that we think and feel and do today. And we're going to talk about how we can like unravel through that in a healing way through the gene keys in a moment. But I just want you to think about like all the past versions of you that you remember were a part of your life, but you don't necessarily feel like you are them anymore. And like for me, it was when I was working professionally, or even like when I was in high school. Like these are versions of me that like I remember, but I don't identify like as them anymore. They're like there was a forking point where I took a different path and I became a different person in a lot of different ways. But those previous consciousnesses, like their fears, their desires, all of them is still within you. And it's the same for your inner child. So sometimes they do like speak up, and sometimes they do drive things that if we're like not aware of what's happening and we're not aware of what their voice sounds like within us. So exploring your inner child, we're going to explore some elements of the Venus sequence. We're going to explore these 4 spheres here, the IQ, EQ, SQ, and core. But I want to explain what the Venus sequence is. So when you look at your Gene Keys profile, you'll see 11 different spheres. These are 6 of them. And we have the activation sequence, which comes first, which is about your physical grounding. And then we have the Venus sequence, which is the astral world, your emotional body. And then that goes into the Pearl sequence, which is about prosperity and higher service. The activation sequence ends at the sphere of purpose. And this is the sphere of purpose is what sits at the bottom of your Gene Keys profile. So your activation sequence ends here and your Venus sequence starts here. And in the Venus sequence, this purpose sphere becomes your purpose within relationships. And then the Venus sequence goes like from purpose to attraction to IQ, EQ, SQ, and core. And that is the order that they go in. And as we move through the Venus sequence, we are unraveling through the conditions that were applied through time. So here I'm going to talk about this more in a moment, but like the IQ is an imprinting period from 15 to 21. And then the EQ is 7 to 14 or 8 to 14. So we meet like our oldest self compared to the younger versions of our inner child. Um, we meet the older inner child first, and then we go to like the teenage self, the child self, and then our core self. I'll talk about that more in a moment as well. And before we get to that, we build a foundation, like first through the activation sequence to have that physical grounding, but to also like have a gentle step into this astral body and into the emotional realm, through like looking at our purpose in relationships and looking at our attractive field and our magnetic field and how they play into the conditioning that our inner child has experienced as well. And the Venus sequence is really designed to open your heart, to unravel the wounding around your heart and around your core, to heal with love and to return to love and to heal the emotional wounds and to unlock the beautiful gifts that come from that. And we'll talk more about that as well. And a question that I have contemplated this question a lot throughout my life, and especially since discovering the gene keys and particularly the Venus sequence as well, this question of like, are we forged through life, or is it predetermined who we will be? And when we look at the gene keys, we have, so when traditionally when I first started exploring like inner child work and inner child healing, it was all around like we were conditioned as children. It's like the world we're in, like our parents' beliefs, the school we went to, like all of these different things, like the traumatic events we had, the stability that we had, like all of that formed this inner child and then formed the person that we were. And through that lens of inner child work, there's a lot of like reparenting, there's a lot of like healing, forgiving, like or reconciling or forgiving with our parents or our guardians or things that were outside of our control. And there's all of this like exploration on all of these like external factors of what like made me the way I am, like what hurt my inner child and how can I heal and forgive and have compassion for all of those things. And while part of us like is forged through our environment and through our conditions, there is a large part of the things we went through as a child that is predetermined. And this is the lens that we take within the gene keys, that the storyline was already written and we were living through it. And as we were as we were a child and as we were growing up through our teenage years and into our adult years, there were storylines that were predetermined to come into our life, and for us to take on that struggling and suffering as a challenge, without any external conditions needing to force that upon us. And this is a question of also like nature versus nurture, and there's a lot of debate around that as well. Like, are we just who we were born to be, or are we forged through life, and are we conditioned into who we are? And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. I think there are elements of both, but I think it's really interesting, through the lens of the gene keys, how we explore this. So when we look at the gene keys profile, we can see that our core, so this is our core wounding. This is an imprinting period from when we are inside the womb, like the 9 months of gestation. And through that period, we are imprinted with our deepest challenge, like our core wound. And it's like our slice of collective karma that we are taking on and bringing into the world. And then from 0 to 7 years old, we come like into the incarnation of our physical body. And from 0 to 7, our physical body like is fully incarnating, as well as our spiritual body and our spiritual quotient, which is in the S cube. And while our spiritual body and physical body is like fully incarnating into the world for those 7 years, there is a story code that we have, the gene key that we have here, that is our story for that time, which is like the shadow that challenges our self-esteem and is the challenge that we rise through to remain with an open heart and our high spiritual intelligence. And then it's not until 8 to 14 years old, as we come into the EQ, that our astral body is fully incarnating. And while our astral body is incarnating, it's bringing a new shadow, a new gift, and a new city that is incarnating within us. And then our mental body isn't fully incarnating into the world until we are 15 to 21 years old. And that's when our formative thinking is formed and the shadow of our thinking comes in as a challenge, and as does the gift and the city here as well. And this is something that I find really interesting, because when I first started exploring the Gene Keys, I thought a lot about the little people in my life, like the people that were under 21, and a lot of them are even under 7 years old. And when I was looking at their profile, I was thinking like, okay, like how does this work? Do they already have these shadows that are like, especially in the SQ, EQ, and IQ, like do they already have them, or is something going to happen that is predetermined to make them have these shadows? And it was kind of like it took my mind to a little bit to get on board with exactly how this works, that we can't prevent children from forming shadows in their life. Like we can't hold them back from their challenges that they are imprinted with and like destined with to have, to allow them to rise into their gifts. And we can hold them to their gifts, and we can definitely we can provide like safe and nurturing environments, and that is like through the Gene Keys path, like that is what allows kids to be in their gifts more naturally. But their shadows and their challenges are always still going to be there. And while like we aren't fully incarnated beings until we are 21 years old, and that the age of 21 like has significance, like it is celebrated. And I think maybe like the reason is maybe a little disconnected with, especially in the Western world, but we are not a fully incarnated being until we are 21. So we have these cosmic imprint and cosmic incarnation happening throughout our whole childhood, like until we are a fully fledged adult at 21. And we don't need to interfere with the story codes that are happening with children in our life or younger people in our life, but we can recognize how this is all played out for us within those periods of our life. And there's elements of reparenting, of forgiveness, of compassion, and all of that. And for me, I think that when I started doing inner child healing work, there was like a lot of forgiveness elements to people in my life through my childhood that I thought, like caused certain things. But I feel like exploring these shadows like in this way to see that, they were actually always predetermined. They were actually always meant to be my challenges to unlock the gifts that I have in these areas. It just allowed such a deeper level of like forgiveness and letting go and acceptance of that is the way that I was cosmically designed to be. And it's not anyone's fault in any way, not even my own. So we're going to explore these 4 spheres and what is within them, and how our inner child healing unravels. And so when we move through the Gene Keys, like I said before, we start in the Venus sequence, we start at purpose, move to the attraction sphere, and then we go to the IQ. So we're going back through time. And this is all, we're going like back through time to get back to our core, essence and the core of the highest gift that we bring into the world. And if we think about it, like we started as like pure, innocent, like just the frequency of love and the frequency of our highest gift. But as soon as we are born, like as soon as we are 0 years old and we are born, we have the wound of separation. And that wound of separation comes from being born into the world and being separated from the womb, like from our mother. And from that moment we start the wounding starts to coil around our core and around our heart and around our body and our life force and our radiance. And every body that incarnates into the world creates this new coil that is wrapped around the core of who we are. So as when we get to the IQ, we have all of these layers of conditioning and shadows and all of these things that are wrapped around, and we go to the IQ first and we unravel the mental shadow, then we unravel the emotional, then we unravel the physical and the spiritual, to arrive like at this core. So we travel back through time, through the Venus sequence. So in the sphere of the IQ, this is the imprint from 15 to 21 years old. 15 to 21 years old is when the mental body incarnates. And this is what forms like our formative years of thinking. This time period from 15 to 21 is when our mental views or our primary mental views of life are formed, our core beliefs, our core values. All of this is really like formed and found between 15 to 21. And there are events that can happen to shift those views and to shift our opinions and the things that we think, but our primary and our core mental views about ourselves and about the world and about how everything works is always formed before we are 21 and in our older teenage years up to 21 years old. Our IQ is the measure of our mental intelligence, and our mental intelligence is the ability to use both sides of our brain, so our logical and our abstract, and our ability to think with flexibility and with vision, logically and intuitively, creatively, like the right and from the right and left side of the brain. And our gift here is like our highest capacity to think. The shadow that we have in our IQ, it really gives rise to all our unconscious mental patterns that make us think in ways that are really rooted in this lack of self-worth, or in the way of lack in general, but particularly in a lack of self-worth. And the shadow drives these mental views that will like undermine us in our life, especially as we move forward, like from 21 years old into our entire life. And most people carry those mental shadows for their entire life. And when we embrace the shadow and unlock the gift that we have within this sphere for this IQ gene key, that's when we open to a whole new level of insight and living wisdom. And we actually use our IQ and our brain to its highest capacity. And we think in a way that is serving to the whole of us, to our gifts, to our higher self, and to our highest purpose. So that is our IQ. And when we think about like inner child healing, like when we are 15 to 21, like we are still essentially a child in those time periods, and we can have grace and compassion to how we developed thinking at that time period. And even though the gene key that you have like tells a story code, there are so many different ways that story can play out depending on your conditioning and your life and your environment through those years of time. So think about when you were 15 to 21, like what views about life did you form? Like what were you thinking about during that time? And how is that level of frequency of thinking still playing out in your life? So then we go back to 8 to 14 years old. And this is when the emotional body became incarnated. And when we look at like going back through time and this like uncoiling or unraveling, the EQ, so the emotional body, set the foundation for the mental body, like for the IQ, and the SQ, which we'll look at next, form the foundation for the EQ. So everything like builds on each other. And that's why we need to unravel the outer layers first before we can get to the core. So our EQ, or our emotional intelligence, was formed from 8 to 14 years old through our, pubescent puberty years. And this is when the astral body was fully incarnated, which sometimes I refer to as the emotional body as well. And this is when the primary emotional patterns were formed in your life, and it will be very linked to the gene key that you have here, the story there. And within the astral body is also where our desires emerge from, and we can think back to this 8 to 14 year period. Like, this is where a lot of our desires and like a lot of different ways emerged from us, as well as our emotions. And this is also the time period where our inner child developed emotional defense strategies. And these emotional defense strategies were always imprinted as a way to protect your heart from pain. And the shadow that you have here in your EQ is your emotional defense strategy that became like incarnated within your body in your teenage years. And it was with the purpose to protect yourself from pain. And that pain may have come from, like all these changes that were happening in your body, in your friendship groups, in your life, all these desires that were coming up that went unfulfilled or misunderstood. And so to protect your heart from the pain of disappointment and all of these things, the shadow that you have here performed a defense strategy for you. Your EQ is the measure of your emotional maturity and also your emotional empathy. And when you embrace the shadow that you have here and acknowledge it as the defense mechanism that it has been, you allow yourself to unlock the gift. And this gift is what brings this permanent opening or reopening of your heart. And this needs to come through self-forgiveness and unconditional love for yourself and for this inner child or past child version of you. So then we go to the SQ. Again, we go back in time from the EQ to the SQ, and the SQ is from 0 to 7 years old. So as soon as we are born into the world, as soon as we are separate from our mother or from the womb that we were born from, we start to form our SQ, and our physical body, when we are born into the world, we have a physical body in the world, but our full physical body and our spiritual body is still incarnating into the world from when we were born to when we are 7 years old. And these are the years that form the foundation of who we are, our self-esteem, our sense of self, our full imprinting into the place that we feel we have in the world, the place we feel we have in our world, our family, or whatever group we are born into, and the wider context of the world as well. Your SQ is your spiritual quotient, and this is how much of your spiritual intelligence animates you in your life. And when you look at little children that are very young, toddlers, babies and toddlers, and even up to 7 years old, most kids they're very animated by their spiritual intelligence. And we can tell because all they do is play. Our spiritual intelligence is what drives us to play in life, and they don't have a fully incarnated emotional body or mental body. So they're not thinking that even though it can appear they're thinking, they're fully present in the moment. They're not thinking about the past or the future, even though sometimes it can appear that they are. And sometimes sometimes some kids are conditioned very early on in life to think in ways that they're not really designed to before they're 7 years old. But they're most of the time young kids, they're just playing and they're fully in the moment and they're fully present. And that presence like is their spiritual intelligence. And in that moment, like they say things or do things or play in ways that like they've never seen before, because they're actually like constantly channeling, and through that they have so much energy to just play and play and play and whatever. Like they're very animated by this spiritual intelligence and by this cosmic energy. And when it comes to us like actually healing this part of our inner child, the gift that we have here like is the gift that guides our sense of self and our sense of our cosmic connection. And when we unlock this gift here, it becomes this really beautiful cosmic guide in our life. And embracing or unlocking the gift, part of that is embracing the shadow that we have here as well, and really acknowledging how that shadow like diluted our life force and diluted our self-esteem and our sense of self in our formative years, but throughout our life as well. And remember that like your EQ and your IQ were built upon the foundation that your SQ laid. So the sense of self that you developed was so important to how the rest of your life played out as well. And when you awaken your SQ, you experience a complete reawakening of your highest consciousness. Your highest consciousness is what allows you to channel that full animation of your spiritual intelligence. And then we get to the core. So the core is where the Venus sequence ends. And once the core is unlocked, it becomes the vocation sphere, which is what you'll see it labeled as on your profile to begin the Pearl sequence. But before it's the vocation, it's the core. And this core is imprinted from within the womb through that around 9-month gestation period. And this is where the imprinting happens for the sacred wound. And the sacred wound is the suffering that you carry on behalf of the whole. It's like your slice of collective karma. And this slice of collective karma, like it is yours to suffer, to experience, and to heal, and to move through, and to rise through throughout your life. And when you heal your wound here, you bring healing to the whole. It's like the part that you were tasked with cosmically, and when you heal it for the whole. And this wound can only be healed like through lessons of love, through an open heart. And that's why we need to uncoil all of this wrapping around, like from the mental body, emotional body, and the SQ and the physical body, before you can really get to the core. And through that journey, you move through the lessons of love, the lessons through your heart, through the whole emotional realm within you and that full depth. And your lessons of love allow you to really activate this gift that you have within your core. And this is the story of your deepest challenge, of your core wounding. And understanding the story helps to heal it. So understanding the whole story code of your whole Venus sequence and all the shadows, gifts, and cities through it, but also specifically like the story code of the gene key that you have within your core. Understanding the story helps to heal it. And healing that, healing your core wound is what activates your highest vocation, which is your highest service in the world. So the core elements, the core elements we have when we look at inner child healing, and when we look at moving through the Venus sequence for your Gene Keys profile, are forgiveness, compassion, love, gentleness, and grace. Oh my gosh, excuse me. And all of that for yourself, first and foremost, for others, and for life. Okay, I think I'm recording again. Yeah, so these elements of forgiveness, compassion, love, gentleness, and grace for yourself, for others, for life as okay, we cut out for a second there, but we're back. So yes, forgiveness, compassion, love, gentleness, and grace, like these are the most important elements when it comes to healing your inner child, moving through this emotional realm, moving through your emotions in general, but particularly when we move through the Venus sequence. And through, like, something that's really important to understand about the gene keys as well is that there isn't anything that you need to do. Like, there's no forced action that needs to be taken. Moving through the gene keys transmission brings you into the like divine synchronicity of the world, and anything that needs to be done will be made apparent to you. But before then, simply coming into the transmission and gently contemplating the story code of each gene key that sorry guys, I think I cut out again. Okay, I don't know where it cut off, but I what I was saying was really important, so I'm gonna repeat it. Okay, so there's nothing that you need to do. There's nothing you need to do outside of being in the transmission and simply like gently contemplating the gene key, the story code of the gene key that you have within each placement, and even just a little bit of the context of the realm it is placed in. So, for example, like the context of the IQ, like what it means to have a gene key placed there, and the story code of the gene key, like okay, I think the recording cut again. I'm just gonna change to my hotspot because it is really annoying me. Okay, we should not cut out again. Okay, so sorry, everyone, about this spottiness. I just changed to my mobile hotspot, so it should not, the Wi-Fi should not cut out again. Again, I don't know where it cut, so I'm just going to repeat what I said last because I think it's really important. Okay, so there's nothing you need to do. All you need to do is align with the natural divine synchronicity that your magnetic field aligns you with in life. And as part of the Venus sequence, going into like grounding your purpose and then going into the attractor field and like amplifying that puts you in alignment with whatever needs to be done, and anything that needs to be done will be made apparent. There is nothing you need to force your way through. So simply bringing yourself into the transmission of understanding the story code of your gene key and the context that is placed in, like the context of the sphere or the realm of life that it is placed in, that is enough. That is truly enough. And I know that sometimes, like looking at your profile and seeing all the numbers and the words and all of that, can feel like there is so much to do, there is so much to learn, there is so much to understand, but it can be done in such a playful, like integrative way, because your biggest muse when it comes to understanding your gifts and your shadows and your gene keys is your daily life. You don't need to take yourself out of your daily life, and contemplating your gene keys within the normal context of your daily life is what will offer the greatest revelations, insights, and all of that. So there is so much like gentle and playful inner child healing work that you can do that is not really working at all. It's through gentle contemplation that breakthroughs and insights naturally arise from. So no matter how wounded you feel your inner child is, know that within those shadows there are beautiful gifts that want to be unlocked and that want to emerge and flood you with this new level of life force. And to get there, it's about embracing the shadows and not seeing them as something that is wrong with you or something that you need to get rid of or heal in a way that is like a symptom that needs to be cut off. Like, your shadows are these innate parts of you and they want to be loved and embraced, and that energy moves you into this state of rising through the challenges to unlock higher frequencies of your gifts so that you can use them into the world and to heal your emotional wounds and patterns as well. Okay, so that is all that I have for inner child healing. If you have questions, please let me know. I want to spend just a minute or two talking about some things that I have coming up and ways you can work with me. The first is Rise, which begins in just a couple of days this Friday on the 10th of June. It is a 5-week group container. It is a hybrid between like mastermind / group program. There are like training transmissions, and I will share a lot around, like I'm going to go into very heavy detail around the gene keys that you have within the 5 spheres that we will cover, as well as like the context for each of them. And this is all about the cosmic coding of your higher self. So we're going to travel along the pathway of individualization. We're going to cover, so the spheres that we cover, we'll start at the purpose, so that grounding, going to the attractor field, so your magnetic pulse and attractor field. We'll explore the SQ, which I've talked about here, your pearl, and your life's work and brand sphere. So they're the 5 spheres that we'll cover. There's space for up to 5 women. There is 1 woman inside at the moment. So it's going to be a very like really beautiful, intimate space if you want to join. It's $555, and I have payment plans available like up to 6 months. So for just $94 a month, you can join now to have this really beautiful catalyst experience. This is going to be like such a deep, intimate dive like of depth and into your individual nature and your gifts, and it's going to be so amazing. If you want the link, I will send you the link and you can explore more about it or reach out. And I'm so happy to have a call with anyone that wants to talk about joining. I also have personal profile deep dives if you just want like a one-on-one time with me, going through the Venus sequence, which I've talked a lot about in this masterclass, is $555. You get a full audio dive. So I'll record an audio going into the 6 gene keys that you have within your Venus sequence. And I'll talk about like the full story code of the gene key, as well as the line number that you have and how that comes into play. And more importantly, like I will connect it all together, because sometimes I think that is like the biggest thing that I bring in, is connecting it together. Like, what is the big picture that your whole Venus sequence paints for you? That audio will probably go, like it'll definitely go over an hour, and it will be very like in detail and in depth. And then we will have a live call together where we can answer your questions. You'll get guidance, coaching. We'll go deeper into any elements that you want to bring up from the audio as well. So it's a really beautiful deep dive, like very in depth, and you will get a full understanding, deep understanding into your Venus sequence in that option. And I also have the activation sequence is where I do recommend that you begin if you haven't explored that yet. And the activation sequence deep dive is $333. You get the same thing, so an audio going each of the 4 spheres for the activation sequence and a live call together. Or if you want to go through your entire profile, we can do that in a 1-month intensive, which is $1,400, and that is broken up into the 3 sequences. So for the activation, the Venus, and the Pearl, you will get an audio deep dive like into each of them. So all of that will be like at least 3 hours long to go through all of those. And you'll get 3 live calls with me, plus 1 month of like unlimited Voxer message support for like full integration and all the things, like for an entire month, which is really amazing. And that's a bonus you get when you sign up for a deep dive through your entire profile. So they're the ways that you can work with me. I also have another option, which is like I call it just the gentle step in, and it's a live 35-minute call with me. You'll get the recording for it, but we can kind of like go into anything in the moment to have more of like a gentle step in to go directly to whatever entryway you want to enter through, and that is $77, which you can message me to book as well. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have enjoyed this masterclass, and if you have any questions or want to explore more with me, just send me a message and I would be so happy to chat with you. Thank you.